Okay, let me officially welcome you. Good evening and thank you for coming. My name is Richard Cooper. I am the President and CEO of NY Spin. Big Visible has been a sponsor for several years, and we greatly appreciate their support. We thank Havas Worldwide for hosting another New York Spin event and for also providing all of the refreshments. Bill Greenbaum, MBA, PMP, CSM, and perhaps some other acronyms, is a business statistics analyst. His current focus is on reducing waste and unnecessary costs of operating energy and water systems for buildings. Bill has over 15 years of IT experience, mostly at First Data and IBM.com. And before that, at Merrill Lynch, he has analyzed online systems, performance, and capacity, developed web applications, and led Six Sigma and Agile initiatives to improve cost, quality, and schedule performance. Bill's record of achievement include the design of internal stakeholders, satisfaction surveys, and member surveys. He has a BA degree from Dartmouth and an MBA from NYU Stern School of Business. He's an experienced and certified Scrum Master and a trained facilitator for InnovationGames.com. Bill is also a longtime member of NY Spin and serves as our Secretary and Treasurer. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, here is Bill.
Thank you. By the way, I didn't design the people in where you said I designed people's surveys. I designed the surveys for the people. Thank you very much for the introduction. I just want to clarify that. So I want to talk to you tonight about common challenges I see that managers of online systems tend to face in the organizations that are in the New York area and really throughout the country. And I want to specifically address some things that I feel that you or we can do about them to turn these challenges, to understand these challenges and to turn them into some kind of opportunity for us, for our colleagues, and for the organization as a whole. And I'd like to dedicate this talk to the many people who are managers of online systems. We owe them a debt of thanks for our email, for our airline tickets, for the books we order, and so much more. And their role in our life is just going to keep getting bigger and bigger as more and more people pile on to the internet. So this is for them. And maybe some of them are sitting right in this room too. You never know, or maybe you will be one day. So, purpose of this is to point out that I believe there are common challenges because there are a common set of aims and practices and assumptions that need to be made if you have the job of managing an online system. So, and in addition, the environment in which we're all operating is, what's a constant is change. And we're all exposed to dramatic change going on around us, economically, socially, environmentally, in so many ways. So these two things together, these two forces together internally, in the marketplace and in the environment, lead to some common phenomenon going on out there. And if we understand them well enough, they can be not problems, but opportunities. So I'd like to tell you a little story. I was riding my bicycle on the west side along the Hudson River. Anyone ever ridden the bicycle up around the tennis courts? It's around 100th Street or so on the Hudson River. It's really beautiful. On a day like today, it's fantastic. So I was riding south on the Hudson, and this is a picture of what I saw at a certain point before the road widened a little bit more and the pathway widened a little bit more. I saw two signs, and I couldn't tell what they said because the sun was shining right in my eyes, and these signs were in the shade. And it occurred, and I was moving, and it occurred to me, this must be what it's like to manage an online system, where you've got thousands, potentially hundreds of thousands of customers out there. You have hackers out there. You have put advertisements out. You've spent money. You've got people working. all these things are moving around you, and time is moving, and time is money. And when something happens that's unexpected, you have a very limited time in which to figure out whether it's important, and if it is, what you should do about it, right? So I said to myself, as I was seeing this, I said, I have to take a picture of this because I'm going to use it in this talk. So that's what I saw initially. Can anyone see what the sign says from where you're sitting? Okay, I couldn't either. I got a little closer, and the signs got bigger, but I could start to make out that the bottom one was red and the top one was green, but I still didn't know what they said. Can anyone see what it says yet?
Yes.
Yeah. The red one. Yeah, the red one.
Okay, don't call it. Okay. So finally, I got close enough. I could see what they both said, and I realized the bottom one, as far as I'm concerned, is noise. If I had only, and that's the one I saw first. If I had just paid attention to that one first and said, well, if that's noise, the other one must be noise too, I would have missed a very important signal, which was right on the right pass on the left. And I really didn't want to stop because there were people behind me, people coming in my way. I didn't want to potentially even cause an accident, and I certainly wanted to get going where I wanted to go. So I said, this is something that is a common challenge that managers face for any operation, but certainly for online systems. So if we can get a little better at distinguishing signals from noise, we can decide things sooner and make better decisions. So that's what this talk is about. And specifically, I'm hoping I can stimulate your thinking, because what you're thinking is going to be a lot more important to me than what I'm saying, okay? I'm hoping to stimulate your thinking to maybe see something in a different light that you hadn't quite thought of that way before, or maybe help you find language to express something you've already observed, and you maybe have been trying to think of a way to discuss it with your colleagues or your manager. Secondly, I want to show you some methods for analysis of questions like these that are not new. They're really quite old. Some of them are close to 100 years old, and I think to a great extent they're not in wide use. If they were used more widely, we'd all be better decision makers. And finally, I intend to do this with very few bulleted lists on the page. So, and the key idea I have isn't totally my own, but I think there are 4 areas that managers of online systems should be thinking about and trying to develop expertise in. And they are change in organizations and the psychology of change, systems theory, something about the theory of knowledge, or how well do we know, or how do we know, and how certain are we of what we claim to know. And thirdly, knowledge about variation. Again, signal versus noise. Now that doesn't happen by accident. That happens with a lot of continuous effort, like continuous improvement. And if people who are dedicated to that, if they focus on these things with the responsibility of running an online system, they're bound to be more successful. And these 4 points are along the lines of what W. Edward Deming wrote about in Out of the Crisis back in 1986. And his ideas weren't all original either. They went back and forth. So some of the common challenges, why are they coming? Because of so much change going on around us. All the different, I still have in my drawer at home the same little book of stamps that I bought at the beginning of the year, because I basically send out no letters. I do everything with email. Don't you? Right? We've saved a lot of money, right? Text messages, I can do payments, I can do everything. Phones aren't cheaper, but the phones that we use can do an awful lot more than the phones used to do, especially the landline that I still have at home. Meanwhile, the computers I have, it's amazing. In 1998, my wife gave me my first little laptop computer. It was a Canon. I think it had 500 megabytes on the hard disk, and it might have had like 40 or 32 megabytes of RAM or something like that. And she bought it used. It was cheap. But it was maybe $600. So in 2000, for $3,000 as an IBM contractor. I actually got a special deal on the price. I spent $3,000 on a PC at IBM. And 12 years later, I spent a third of the money. I got something that had basically 10 times the processing power and 10 times the storage. So that's why there's so much change going on around us, because of all the changes in technology. And that's not going to stop. There are also, I talk about similar practices and similar aims of people in an organization. Well, if running an online system, by the way, when I say system, I just don't mean the system end of it. I mean including the application and the back end and the fulfillment, and the whole thing is a system from the standpoint of systems analysis. And you need to get users to find you. You want to earn their loyalty. You need to collect and provide certain data, some of which is very protected. Other is public. You find certain records in order to do certain transactions or do certain work. You deliver goods. And finally, you have to do batch work and maintenance work to do some major jobs, major processing jobs. So that's, whether it's Ruby on Rails or Java or what have you, you're going to be trying to do these same things. So you're under a certain amount of constraints, and you have certain focus that could lead to some common assumptions and some common practices. So every online system has to fulfill functional and non-functional requirements. And if they don't, there are problems, for example. So it goes on. So there are also these bodies of knowledge. There's PMBOK, and there's BABOK, and there's AMBOK, and is there any other BOK that anybody knows about? All these BOKs. Okay, so whether they're formally followed or fully followed or not, to a certain extent they've been adopted, and the idea of a triple constraint is very popular. PMI now has a 6-pointed constraint. They actually have a star, and but for the purpose of this talk, let's just talk about this triple constraint. The idea that if you change the cost, what you're going to spend on something, you're going to have to affect the schedule of it, or you may have to lower the scope. Same thing, if you change any one element, you're going to affect the others. Cost is something that I've been tracking a lot of in terms of projects, because I've been in project work, and that's development, that's new things. But that's actually not the major cost that people managing online systems have to be concerned about, because the major part of the cost of any online system is going to be what happens after it goes to production. And it's actually in development in a relatively short amount of time and for a relatively short portion of the total cost. So, in fact, Dan Gallerath, who, if I'm correct, is going to be speaking to you in a few months for NY Spin, if we nail that down, he says that maintenance can be 75% of the total cost of ownership of an online system. And so it behooves us to focus on not costs related to projects, but costs related to maintenance and operation. And when you have something out in production, as opposed to when it's under development, there are certain risks that you entail then, as well as costs. There's no way until you go to production you could ever be brought into court by the FTC for not delivering something. But it cost 7 retailers $1.5 million back in for what they did in Christmas time of 1999. And so the biggest fine on any individual company was $350,000. For a company like Macy's or Toys R Us, I don't think that's really a lot of money, but their legal fees must have been substantially more. And penalties could certainly get bigger as the stakes get bigger. So all your revenue and most of your cost is happening with operations and management. So now the time portion I want to talk a little bit about, because also in project work we're very concerned about time, and this has been one of the driving factors behind the growth of Agile in terms of developing software, because you're supposed to develop things faster, you get started faster, and you start delivering real live product sooner, and you have smaller teams. You get the same amount of work done with fewer people, they say, so your costs are different, your resource stretches are different. And you can accept change, right? Sounds great. Sounds like a win-win, right? But what's happening very often, and I'm not saying where I've seen this, but I've certainly heard of it, and to a certain extent have seen it, tendencies this way, that people think that agile means you're going to do something faster. It means the whole project schedule can be more aggressive. Well, that's not what agile means at all. Agile doesn't mean you're going to be faster. You know what agile means? The whole agile movement is about? It's about being able to change direction. That's what being agile means literally. And in terms of what founders of the Agile Manifesto had in mind, it's you can deal with the fact that there's going to be changing requirements. And you can make better, and also there's a question about delivering things of value, not just doing work, right? And not just doing things faster, but instead of making features that people aren't going to use very much, you build the things that are of the highest value first. And if you run out of money because you didn't produce everything you originally intended to, that's okay, because you'll have delivered 80% of the value, and it's already been out there in the marketplace for a long time, and it's better because you've had feedback from all the customers and all the business owners. So Agile isn't really about time. It's more about change. And so, but since schedules are very frequently, in a lot of organizations, very aggressive, and who here would say you've heard of an organization, I'm not saying yours, you've heard of an organization where they have very aggressive schedules for doing project work? Heard of it. Okay, fine. We all have, right? Okay. So what does that mean, you know? It's not lower risk. It's higher risk in a certain way. So let me tell you another story that illustrates something about aggressive schedules, human nature, and value. This is a picture of a building at the Princeton Theological Seminary, where there's a famous study that was written up in the book called The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell. And in this study, there were two groups of divinity students. They were each individually given, as a group, given instructions and told, you will have an assignment to prepare a short presentation for some faculty members and some students in another building. At a certain time, you will individually be told to go to that building. You're supposed to go directly there, make this presentation. There were some minor differences in what the two groups of people were told beyond that. Some of them were told nothing more than that. And others were told, you have to hurry. Or we're running late. You really got to hurry. Now, unbeknownst to these students, when they individually walked over to this building, on their way, they came across someone who was an actor, but they didn't know it. The students didn't know it. And this actor was groaning on the ground and not moving. He was obviously in pain. And the question was, would these students stop and help this person or not? Now remember, these are divinity students. You think they have a good sense of values, right? Well, this is what happened. The people who were told to hurry the most were least likely to help that person. In fact, only 10% of the people who were told you're in a big hurry helped that person. Over about 2/3 of the people who were told there was really no hurry at all, they helped the person. Those two are far significantly different from the average of all students in this study, who 40% of whom helped the person. Now, there was another difference. Some of these students were told, the presentation you're going to give is going to be about seminary jobs. So it's basically a task-oriented presentation. And others were told, you're supposed to give a presentation about the importance of being a good Samaritan. Now look at how many of those people ended up helping the person in need. Those who had a helping theme for their talk, only 53% of them ended up helping, as opposed to 40% of everybody. And it's really quite a bit less than the total who said there's no hurry at all. those who are given a task theme, even fewer of those, like Yosemite drop, they were trying so hard to get there. Some people even stepped over the person who was on the ground in pain. So what this shows is two things. Number one, aggressive scheduling is in direct conflict with good team performance because people aren't likely to help other people out. Secondly, it puts people in a position where they're conflicted such that they're likely to do things that are against their own values. Okay? Secondly, or thirdly, it proves that just having some thinking about what's the right thing to do, that doesn't mean necessarily you're going to do it under a situation where in time is under great pressure. So that means that if you're a manager of an online system, and you want your people to work together as teams and do this agile stuff and produce great work, so you put up all these posters on the wall that say, teamwork, and what's something else you've seen?
Client-centric.
Exactly, client-centric, right. Quality, It doesn't mean anything if you also are telling them, you gotta hurry. Okay? I mean, you really gotta hurry. And you don't give them a sense that they can work and do work well and help others if they need to and succeed as a team. So, I love that stuff. Another source of challenge is that a lot of organizations, as they become successful, they grow. And as they grow, they tend to become very hierarchical. So, I can't imagine exactly how Jeff Bezos and the people at the top of the pyramid at Amazon, exactly how they figure out what's going on down at the bottom, because there are 97,000 people in Amazon, employees. I read that last year, in about 4 months, they hired 37,000 people. They added about 50% of their workforce. Unbelievable. So they have 19 N2, that's the lowest level officers, at least the lowest level that I could see in a period, reporting up to 11 higher level officers who report to 9 board members. But below all those people are 97,000 people. So the people at the top can become very separated from what actually goes on. So if those people at the top are making the real strategic decisions, how will they get the information they need to make good ones? How will they know what the real problems are? They need data. They need data, they need information and communication from the people at the bottom. They need to know what's going on there, right? Well, I have some ideas about how they can go about that. Another thing about hierarchical organizations, sorry, it's not something I like, but I would say that by necessity, people tend to specialize either on the business side or the technology side. This is a generalization, but as a generalization, I think it has some value to think about. So people who are more of a business mind, they have business sort of, that's what they like doing, that's what where their talents are. Their approach to IT, in many cases, not in all cases, in many cases, IT is basically a necessary cost center. And if you can manage it as a cost center, you try to get more out of it with less resources. And meanwhile, people on the technology side, they want actually need some time to say, hey, wait a minute, let's try to do less, but do a better job of it, and get it done. They're very often stretched thin sometimes, right, with resources. But it's business that holds the cards in terms of funding because they produce the revenue. So the last item here in terms of the technology mind, getting right, getting it done, handing it off. Some people on the technology side, they just want to get it done and out the door, and hand it off to the next person. Others really want to get it right. And they'll be willing to say, I got to tell you, it's going to be late because there's no way we can finish it, but we'll do it right. And if the business is smart, they'll know that sometimes it's really more important to get it right than to get it done soon, if you have to choose between the two. But the point is, between these two cultures that are living in parallel and depending on each other, there's often conflict. Okay? So how do you resolve that conflict and try to help these people make the most of the fact that they have different talents? How to get synergy. So I have one suggestion. Study psychology. The way people think, particularly people who are different from you. Because to my own surprise, I found out that not everyone thinks the way I do. Not everyone's going to vote for any particular candidate, no matter how good or bad any of the candidates are. There's always somebody, sometimes a lot of people voting for candidates I would never want to vote for, but they would say the same thing about the people I vote for, right? A person who's done some very interesting work in the way personality comes to bear in the workplace is a person named Dr. Rick Brinkman. And he's written a hilarious book, which actually is very insightful. And this is a sort of a key diagram from that book, which he gave me permission to reprint. His book is called Dealing with People You Can't Stand. And I highly recommend it. And he says people are motivated by different things. And for each of us is motivated at different times by each of these four things. And a good person who has a good sense of serenity with himself can live with the fact that all these things are important to a certain extent. But some of us are more motivated by one than the other three. So if you really want to focus on getting it done, you may not really want to take time to see that it gets done right. You'd rather get it done because you can always fix it later. But if you want to get it right, then you'll let it wait to get done until it's right? And some people really want to get appreciated for whatever they're doing. If they don't get that kind of recognition from their peers or from their company or their family or whatever, they really get down, Other people aren't so bothered by that because they give themselves that recognition. They don't need it from others so much. They're motivated by something else. Other people just want to get along. They want to have a good time. They want people to like them, which is different from being appreciated for what you've done. Getting along is actually, involves things where you spend time together with people and people want to spend time with you. So what's very interesting is when people in the technology area and the business area who are from two different cultures, you might find that in particular organizations, those two areas maybe have more people who are like the get it done type in one group and more people who are the get it right type in the other group. And if they just recognize that they thrive in different kinds of environments, they ought to be able to find a middle way. They shouldn't say, well, that person just we shouldn't keep that person. It's not worth it, That person actually has some talents, but the question is, do we appreciate the fact that he's just different from me? People are different and people are diverse. It helps us understand how to reach people out there in the marketplace because there's diversity in the marketplace. So that's one suggestion, is study psychology, develop your appreciation for other people, and learn to work with others who are different from you. You'll always learn something. And you might get something done you could never accomplish yourself. The second solution is to find new ways and use new tools for collaborating, like innovation games. Unbelievable. You can either, if I wanted to have a SWOT analysis, anyone done a SWOT analysis before? Mm-hmm. Okay, what does that stand for? Forget about February. Forget about it.
Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats.
Right. Now, sometimes strengths and weaknesses are internal, and opportunities and threats are things that are from external. Right? Sometimes strengths and weaknesses are things you're currently dealing with, and opportunities and threats are potential things you're concerned about you might have to deal with and you need to prepare for because they're on the horizon. But you could play that game on the wall, but a lot of our teams are dispersed. So Innovation Games has made this site where you can play these games online with people all over the world playing these games. You can even have hundreds of people participating in a SWOT analysis or other kinds of analysis to either prioritize work, analyze a problem, or develop a new product. Join me. I love sharing my screen with people. And I actually find it easier than some other services that are out there that people do subscribe to and pay a lot more for. This one's basically free, at least on a certain level. You know some of the others. There are all kinds of ways to collaborate, and it's great to be able to work with people who are not only different, but not necessarily in your time zone. The third area about knowledge of systems. Everyone is familiar with systems. Okay, I'm not going to I don't have to define what a system is, but the point is that systems have different types of elements to them. There are stock elements and there are flow elements. A stock element would be, let's say, I have a bathtub and I'm running the water, right? A stock is how much water is in the bathtub at any one time. So if it's very low, I don't care if the water is running very fast or very slow, because the stock is so low, it's not going to overflow. When it's high, I'm very concerned about the rate at which the water is flowing in. But the flow measure doesn't tell me what the stock measure is doing, and the stock measure doesn't tell me what the flow measure is doing. But together, they give me an idea of the status of the system and whether I need to act or not. Also, they have feedback loops, which are mainly controlled by stock measures, not by flow measures. And knowing the difference will help managers decide whether to intervene or not in the system. And they also have leverage points. There are places where you can do something very small, very inexpensive, something that doesn't take too long, and actually leverage it to have a big effect. So people doing work in systems theory are really fantastic about describing classical ways that systems exhibit these behaviors and how to recognize leverage points in a system, how to distinguish a stock versus a flow, and what its significance is. I'll bet you a lot of managers just don't have the time or can't make the time to try to develop their knowledge about these things. But it will pay off because they'll be smarter managers. Systems, a little bit about systems. Systems that are in statistical control are predictable. That's why it's good to be able to put a system in statistical control. That's the only purpose of doing it. Because if it's predictable, you can use it for something. You know what it should cost to maintain it, too. Professor Deming said, left to themselves, systems will fall into chaos. A system is defined by a goal, and the way it meets a goal or a set of goals is through a relationship between various elements that have operations running through them. And for any system to actually reach its goals, it's got to be managed. So here's an example of a system in statistical control. Anyone see this picture on Sunday in the New York Times? This is a 19-year-old Canadian who's going to go to the Olympics for the first time in Sochi. He thinks he has a good shot at winning the snowboard competition. And he's in his backyard, bouncing off a trampoline, doing flips. And he knows he's in dynamic equilibrium because he knows he's able to come out of the flip and land exactly the way he wants, and then go up again and again. Because he says, I always have air awareness. So what that means is he's got data, and he knows how to read it and how to make a decision quickly enough to help him keep this system in equilibrium. And that's a beautiful, predictable system. That's the way you want an online system to work, right? Keep on cranking it. So in terms of the idea of a theory of knowledge, this may sound like a very funny or unusual or strange thing to do, but it's actually a pretty interesting exercise. We know things. We know things. The problem is in organizations, people change, right? People come and go in these organizations. So someone who knows something, if he leaves, that knowledge goes with him unless someone else knows that thing, right? So it's a really interesting exercise to think of a problem or a system and say, well, this is what I know, this is what I don't know. But what I know and don't know happens in a context of knowing and not knowing. In other words, I know that I know certain things. And there are other things I'd like to know, but I don't know what they are. I don't know those things. I know what it is I want to know, but I don't know it. So the things I know that I know I put in this quadrant. I have a 4 up here. Things I know that I don't know. I'll put it here. I want to move these things that are here into there, right? Then there are things that I don't know. But I actually know that I don't know them. And I know that I should know them. Oh no, things I don't know that I know. Things I don't know that I know. Can you think of something you don't know that you know? I thought of something the other day. I was trying to figure out how to take data that tells something about a system shutting things on and off at certain times. And then I could tell by certain time periods how long it was running in each time period. So I basically had to figure out a formula in Excel or a macro to say, take data that's in one form in terms of the duration of some phenomenon, and then break it up and then reformat it in a completely different representation. And I could figure out the two ends, how long it was in those end periods. But how many middle periods there were, I didn't know how to get this into Excel, but I knew I could do it manually. It's just that there are about 70,000 of these cells to fill in it, and I would never finish it. So then I realized that I actually knew how to do that, because I knew when the beginning and ending period was. All I had to do was have a formula, find the beginning and ending period, just fill in the middle with all those numbers that I know were always going to be 15 minutes. So that was something I didn't know that I knew, and I realized, hey, I know that. And then there's things that you don't know that you don't know. And those are things that really can grab you, and they surprise you. Now, and the things you say you don't know that you know them, you don't realize that you knew them until you realize that you knew them. So as soon as they can move into here where you know that you don't know it, it's out of there. But it came from there. It came from something that you don't know that you know. Anyway, if you try this, you may discover something that either you knew something you didn't know, or you will help you prioritize something you really want to know, and help you clear away all the clutter from all the stuff that you know. Plus some of the things that you know actually aren't true. That's one of Mark Twain's famous sayings. It ain't the stuff that you know that gets you. It's stuff that you think you know, but it ain't so. Okay. So there's some things in here that are bad. They actually aren't true. They're a mistake. Because there's something we don't know about those things. Right? But so also for the purposes of continuity and organizational learning of an organization running an online system, you certainly want, if you know something, you certainly want to capture it and preserve it and spread that knowledge to other people in the company. So anything that you know that's useful, you should be cataloging. If no one's keeping track of it, it may go out the door with the people who know it. And then you'll have to start all over again. And that'll cost you a lot, right? Why not save the money? So this is a really interesting thing to do. But this is, again, something that you wouldn't normally be told to do this as part of your job, but it's fun, and you could really figure something out you've never even thought about before. Okay, so let's talk about some assumptions. I have 4 assumptions I want to tell you about, because I said a lot of these challenges come from management making certain assumptions because they're all having a common set of experiences. So one common assumption, I've heard people tell me this before in different organizations. They say, things are really grinding to a halt, It must be that, usually people who are the systems people, not the application people, they say, it must be we've had just a lot of people piling in, and just buying things, hitting that server. And sometimes it is, but sometimes it isn't. And you don't know unless you actually go in and look at the data. So you need someone on a team that's running a system or an application to actually proactively just be familiar with the times in which normally the cycle of the community you're serving would have surges and quiet periods. If you have a community you're serving, believe me, there will be a pattern somewhere. Whether it's once a month or several times a month, whether it's once a week, there's a pattern. And if you find it, very often you'll find that, no, this is what I did a study once where someone said to me, things are slowing down. We got to find out what it is. Where is it that there's a surge of activity going on? It must be that. So this is daily volume by hour. Okay? Anyone see that? And these dark periods here, these vertical dark periods, shaded periods, are where there was latency in the system. And you can see that the spikes, the peaks in the volume, have basically nothing to do with the periods of latency. So what that is your system is not optimized, or your code is not optimized. It has nothing to do with volume. So, again, if you get really good at doing this, you can very quickly see things before they actually become significant latency. You can see latency developing, and you can eliminate major sources of it a lot sooner if someone's actually looking at this kind of information. By the way, sometimes latency, it's very interesting, some problems are data-centric. What that means is, and it happens often where in companies where you just don't have a lot of resources and a lot of time for really, really a lot of testing. And you don't have a robust testing platform. What happens is you put out an application, right? And years go by, and you have customers who develop histories, transaction histories, account histories, right? So when they're new customers, they say, I want to pull in and look at my account history. They're pulling in very little bit of data. And every day they are on the system, and they go back and say, I want to look at my account history. They're pulling in a little more, and a little more, a little more. Eventually, thousands of them doing this. If you're not careful, you'll hit a bottleneck in whatever they're pulling that into. If you, like memory, if you want to be able to process things quickly, instead of going back to the server again when they want to look at a different portion of all that history, if you haven't tested to see what's the limit, what's the constraint the memory is working under, and is there some better way of pulling just a certain portion of it in memory, so you prevent ever hitting that bottleneck, based on also the number of people you expect to be doing this. So it's a combination of number of requests plus the magnitude of resources each request is going to take. But that's data-centric problem. It would never show up when you first set the thing out there. Even for the first few years, it will never show up. And suddenly it starts hitting the system really bad, unless you've tested for that kind of bottleneck. So it's very interesting what happens as you manage systems and they become successful and they age. And it could be a bottleneck elsewhere, like a network. Okay. Second assumption I've heard sometimes people make. They all worry about letting people with mobile phones get onto their web applications, right? People are very worried, legitimately. And there are different browsers suddenly they have to start now catering to as well. And this can really could grind things to a halt also, or there could be some potential hacker out there who's trying to bring you down. Well, I submit to you that, that's a potential threat, definitely. System availability means the thing goes down, it's out. It's not that it's slow. But what I found, I've heard of this, is that you get a complex system set up, you've got an awful lot of licenses. You've got SSL certificates. You've got all kinds of things that need to be renewed to allow the system to keep functioning. Otherwise, you won't have access to those facilities. And in organizations where people are changing and things are growing and the company gets bought and responsibility changes around, sometimes this just drops by the wayside because no one has to do anything about it immediately. But at some point, one of these hundreds of licenses, or 2 or 3 or 4, they get, what happens? you could be shut down for several days. That application could be down for several days if you haven't renewed an SSL certificate. And you suddenly have to do it, because it's a manual process. And if the people who know the most about it don't happen to be there because they're on vacation, you're really stuck. That really does happen. And to online stores, this is like murder. This would kill them, drive them up the wall. So you don't want it to happen to you. So if you want to be managing an online system and doing it, make it work, you got to be willing to take care of this little problem 365 days a year. And if you don't have a system for doing it, it's going to get you sooner or later. You may as well start putting in the investment in it. Thirdly, out of 4, they have a lot. Management always looking at a lot of reports. They have more than they need, right? The question is, they're confident that they're looking at the right stuff. But if a process consultant or a process, any person with an interest in systems looks at the stuff they're looking at, sometimes they're not looking at the right information to help them make a decision. They may be looking at a census. They may be looking at a count of something. But the U.S. Census is probably the biggest census that is done, right? At least in America. Well, there's nothing predictive about a census. There's no information in a census that will tell you what's the population likely to be next year or in 2 years. It's merely a coincident indicator. It's not a leading indicator of anything. Level of population is a function of in-migration and out-migration and deaths and births and all these other things. But the census itself is just a snapshot of where things were at that point. But it's nothing that will enable you to predict, and therefore nothing that will enable you to make any decision about what should be for the period going forward. So what is? This is an example of a problem that I helped solve. Managers were concerned about quality complaints from their customers. There's a quality issue. A lot of bugs. There were a lot of bugs. So what numbers did management look at to figure out how many bugs there were and whether they were making progress month to month? They were looking at the total count of all outstanding bugs, all open bugs. And the number was getting bigger. Except you can see the last couple months it actually went down. Now the question is this, would you call this a trend, like we've turned the corner? Or is it predictive? Or is it maybe just going to keep going up, or who knows? So I looked at this and I said, this is a census. This is not going to help you make a decision. This won't tell you whether you're doing better or worse. Because some bugs ought to stay there for a long time because they're so low priority, they're just not worth it. They're cosmetic. Other bugs, you could spend a lot of time on just a few bugs because they're so important that they're worth it. And then there's everything in between. So the number of outstanding bugs, by the way, this is at the end of every month, so just one day count, one period count. It's only telling you about 1 day out of 30 the whole year anyway. But so for those 2 reasons, this is not the right information to look at. Instead, I said they should be looking at, look, you want to prevent bugs, right? Once a bug is a bug, it's costly to fix, right? Prevention is always cost less than repair, right? Conformance costs are always less than non-conformance costs. So they should look at how many new bugs they get in the course of a month. And by the way, remember what I said about stocks and flows? This is a stock, right? It's the total count of bugs in your system that are open. That's a stock. This is a flow. How many new bugs are coming into the system? There's what's the rate at which new bugs are coming into the system over the course of a whole month, not 1 day. So stocks and flows. If I have new bugs coming into the system, I know I have work to do to fix them at some point. And I have problems. If I have no new bugs coming into the system, even if I don't finish any particular bug, I'm not having any new problems. So that's good. So if new bugs go down, that's good. If new bugs go up, that's bad. And then in terms of, so that's again, stocks and flows and what's useful information for prediction. Also, you see the gap between all new bugs and the new most severe bugs. The gap is a little wider. It got nice, very narrow here. As a percent of all the new bugs, even though all the new bugs went down, the most highest severe bugs were pretty 50% of all the new bugs. That's not good. So the question is also, is this a trend that now you've got a nice wide, you got a very low percent of all the total bugs are actually severe ones. That's good. I don't care about the other ones so much. But the question is there anything predictive in this information? Is there enough predictive information for me to have any confidence that it's likely to stay down? Well, that's a statistical and probabilistic question that you can answer with a control chart. So this relates to the fourth assumption, that, execution. Okay? Well, I don't believe that, because how do you know what to execute unless you know what you're doing, and what should be happening? So is it worthwhile to study theory, statistical theory? You bet. Managers and their reports should be studied. You need a hypothesis. To develop knowledge, you need a hypothesis of something you think is true, or maybe you think is not true, and then you need to test that hypothesis, get the results, and see whether you were right or not, and see if you can figure out why whatever happened. If you happened for the right reasons, or was there something surprising. So that's theory. That's using theory. There's something called the germ theory that didn't even exist in the Civil War. In the Civil War, more soldiers died because of infections because the doctors who were amputating their feet or legs infected them because they didn't know anything about germs. Because there was no one had seen a germ, and there was no idea that germs exactly existed. At a certain point, science developed where there was this theory about germs, and eventually, when there were experiments and there were microscopes, people could actually prove that there were germs. Once there was a germ theory, and that theory was tested and proven, then doctors were able to find out that antibiotics and other things killed germs and sterilized equipment so that then they could do these operations and not be killing people when they thought they were safe. So we want to do the same thing with our online systems. We don't want to kill them, but by doing something that ends up being bad, we want to be doing something that's right. But we develop that knowledge with theory and hypothesis testing. So, and you develop something like a control chart from understanding something about theory, statistical theory. And that these charts work are just amazing. If you ignore the bottom chart now, there are two charts here. This is anyone know what this is called? An individuals and moving range chart. The bottom chart has one less dot on it than the top chart, because the bottom chart is made by looking at the top chart and taking the difference between one point and the next. So this point represents the difference. 5 represents the difference between this point at 35 and this point at 40. Right? See, in this kind of chart, this will show you, we're used to saying standard deviation, right? 3 standard deviations on either side. The formula for standard deviation that we're all familiar with has nothing to do with the order in which observations are made. It's simply you divide things by the number, the value. You have the square of the average, and divide by the number. It has nothing to do with the order in which things are observed. But this chart, the moving range chart, incorporates information about the order in which observations are made. So if there's a lot of volatility, more than should be in a stable system, it'll show up first in the moving range chart. Now, these numbers could be bouncing around a lot, but it could be bouncing around within a range that's okay. But this chart will show you sometimes before that one will come. This chart has to be totally in statistical control before that one is in statistical control, the individual reading. So this is a red dot, which means that it's, at this point, it violated one of the 9 rules that are being tested for. This rule was that 2 out of 3 points that are more than 2 standard deviations away from it and on the same side as the average, that's not something that's random variation. That's special cause variation. That means your system has changed at this point. Well, it's changed in a good way because these are counts of bugs, and these are so far below, they're staying so far below the average because you've done something to improve the system, You've fixed some major problems where you've gotten better at so you don't have other problems coming back. So at this point, from this point forward, you can start making a new average for the system, which is going to be down here, and a new range for what's statistical control, which will be tighter. But you only know that this is such a point where you can declare victory because you use a control chart to tell you. It's so simple. It was invented in 1924. How many people here see people using control charts around you? Not enough, right? Not enough. I go into a meeting with this, and tell people this, and they say, "Wow, this is great.
And
We won."
you can almost see a burn down chart in Scrum is almost kind of vaguely related to this. I don't know. That's too far of a stretch, but.
It wouldn't be because you don't want that. You don't want to fluctuate around an average. You want that to burn down to 0.
That's true. That's true.
But you could do something about sprint to sprint. If each dot were some measure of what happened during a sprint,
Yes.
you could say, well, the sprints are getting better. And
Or just maybe what I mean to say is, could you use this in that context
in the context of
of figuring out
yeah.
improvement?
Yeah. Anything that has a distribution, anything that you have measuring things repeatedly over time. Yeah, it's cool. And there are many different forms of control charts based on what you need to measure and what you want to make sure you're doing apples to apples comparisons of one thing to the next. For example, this doesn't tell us what the area of opportunity there was for there to be bugs in any one time. I'm assuming the area of opportunity is about the same. Roughly, so that's another question. Those are the nitty-gritty details. Good point. Are there any, at this point I just want to take some questions. Are there any questions anyone wants to say? Okay. Did you learn anything new? Did you see anything or hear something you might not have heard said exactly that way? I hope so. Okay. I just want to say that I'm really excited to be able to give this talk. I've been waiting for 15 years to give this talk, and really pleased to do it. And again, just management with a deep understanding of organizational change, systems theory of knowledge, and variation will be a strong kind of management that's needed to lead a company with an online system in the kind of landscape we're looking at. So we make common assumptions, and we face a lot of similar challenges. Fortunately, there are many tools out there that have been well tested and that help us see signals and make the distinction between signals and noise. And the more we use them, the better off we'll all be. And I'm confident that if you pursue any of these, it can only be a win for you and for your colleagues and your clients. Richard?
All right, let's hear it one more time for Bill.